welcome to CWS as it is. How are you?
Excellent, excellent.
I'm glad to hear that. Captain Gerry Gouveia, CEO of Roraima Airways, Arrow Point Resort, Duke Lodge, and Roraima Residence Inn. Gerry, how long have you been in business?
22 years.
Oh my God. And looking at the long arc of your journey, what has changed? What are you happy about now from the time you started to now?
I guess a country that was continuously evolving and transforming, living in a country that is in transition, that is being created over the years where the enabling environment for private sector development was happening. And I think over the years, the ability to run this business and to develop this business equal to anywhere in the world.
When you first started, Gerry, what were some of your earliest fears and how you overcame them?
Well, I never entered business thinking with fear. I think I told you this before, I actually anticipated in a big way where Guyana was going, and I believe that we were an agricultural driven country. And I also understood very, very clearly that Guyana was going to, and had to move to a service-driven economy and country. And so I set about developing a service sector entity to meet the challenges that was going to come with the economic development that I foresee in the future. And so, it turned out exactly as I predicted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at what point along the way you realized you were on the right track?
From the day Desmond Hoyt started the reform programs in Guyana, Desmond Hoyt actually was a champion of the reforms. And from the time he started that back in the 1989, 1990, I actually started my business in 1992. But I knew then that Guyana was changing, and I knew then that when you study the history of economic development across countries, that countries that was moving from where we were to where we were going, that services were important. So from the very early days of watching the positive development that was happening under Desmond Hoyt, I knew that we had nowhere to go but forward.
Mm-hmm. Gerry, tell us a little bit about your experience with the private sector.
Well, one of the things that happened is the private sector was annihilated under the years when we experimented with socialism and so on. 95% of the economy was controlled by the state. And so when I came out of the army and then eventually started my own business, one of the things that I set about to do very early was to join the private sector organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, the Tourism and Hospitality Association, the Aircraft Owners Association, and so on, particularly to make the private sector mobilized and strong, so that never again was the private sector going to sit by idle and allow only the politicians to occupy the developmental space, developmental management space of Guyana. And so very early what I did was set about becoming involved in the private sector, working hard to making the private sector mobilized and organized, and so that our voices were going to be heard at every stage of our national development, whether it's security, whether it was social issues, and particularly issues that affect the private sector.
Mm-hmm. May 11th.
And what I've seen and what has happened since then is that the private sector, in the early days when I joined the private sector was fighting with government every day. Every day we were in the media, we were fighting for this and fighting for that. And very early I recognized that fighting with the public sector was not a very sensible thing to be doing. What we needed to do was develop the public-private sector partnership concept so that we could sit, we could talk, we could listen to each other. We don't necessarily always have to agree with each other, but so long as we heard each other, I believe that was important. And that is what we set about to do. And then eventually the IDB came into Guyana and worked with us and set up something called the competitive strategy, where we sat with the public sector and we identified 145 items that affect Guyana competitiveness. Things like energy, ports, customs, power, and so on. And then we developed these working groups with the public sector, and eventually we set up what is called the Competence Council, chaired by the president, where the labor and the private sector sat with government, and the opposition was part of that as well, where we sat there and we talked about national development issues. And we picked 10 items in the 141, things like, for example, the Deepwater Harbor Port, the Port of Georgetown, the road to Lethem, hydropower, and all of, the airport development. All those things were part of the competitive strategy.
So you have been involved with those things, or have seen them, the planning of them for a while now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And how many of them has taken root?
Sorry?
How many of those projects that were identified has taken root?
Well, I'll tell you, in 1999, actually, in 1999, President Jagdeo at the time had invited the private sector leaders into the Pegasus. And we had about 300 people that was locked up in the Savannah suite with the president at the time. He was a young man, but he said, we're not leaving here until we sit down together and craft a 10-year program to look at what is it the private sector want, what is it the government want, and so that we could set a roadmap. And we sat down there in 1999 and looked forward into 2009 and looked at issues of what was going to happen in Lethem, issues of what was going to happen in the banking sector, issues of what was going to happen with power, the hydro. We've understood that the manufacturing sector of Guyana could never be competitive unless we had economic power supply system, and that had to be solar hydropower, because we don't produce oil, and so a lot of those things came to pass. Issues of income tax reform was a big issue. So we actually saw the reduction of income tax from 33% to 30%. We saw the corporation tax move as well to 30% and so on. So it is not moving as fast as we want, but I'll tell you, we are seeing the development happen.
And what do you anticipate for the next 10 years in the private sector, regardless of who is in government?
Well, I actually believe that regardless of who's in government, this country, economic development the trajectory is going to happen. And I think that what we are going to see is unprecedented economic growth. And I'll tell you why. Because, all our existence, we as an English-speaking country on the continent of South America ignore the rest of South America. We have only looked to the north for our trading partners, Barbados and Trinidad, the British colonies, but we ignore South America. And particularly we ignore Brazil. Now, Brazil is one of the largest economies in the world. In the last 10 to 15 years, that has changed tremendously. The Brazilians have now built a $6 million bridge across that river. The Brazilians are looking to move a lot of their manufacturing sector from southern Brazil into northern Brazil into the states of Roraima, which, by the way, was named after my company.
Nice plug there, Gerry.
And so the government of Brazil is spending huge incentives for the companies in the south to move into the northern Brazil, and those companies need access to ports. The port through Port Georgetown is 350 miles to the rainforest of Deepwater Harbor, as against 700 miles to the south to get to Rio and Brasilia and so on. So that the relationship with Brazil is going to catapult Guyana economic development to the next level. We are looking at a $600 million super highway through the rainforest. We're looking at a $400 million Deepwater Harbor. We're looking at a $15 billion hydro that they're looking to build, and the feasibility is going on as we speak in the Mazaroni to power northern Brazil. So Guyana will be selling that power to northern Brazil. So when you think about the future, you think about the oil exploration that's happening off the coast of Guyana today with ExxonMobil. You look at the Reunion Manganese that is looking to develop that $400 million manganese mine in the Massachusetts area. You're looking at Guyana Goldfields developing that $400 million gold mine for the next 25 years. There's enormous things that is on the horizon. So for me, I'm extremely optimistic about the future. And, all we need to do is keep putting our shoulder to the wheel. Look, Guyana do have a lot of challenges as a small country. We are transitioning. There's a lot of challenges. But I'll tell you something. I would rather be nowhere else in the world.
I hear that. May 11, Gerry, elections. What does that mean to you as a businessman and the private sector? Well, I think you mentioned just now that the private sector will still continue its trajectory. But to you personally and as a businessman, what does this mean to you?
Actually, the democracy of Guyana is extremely important. The democracy for Guyanese being able to choose their own government in a fair and free elections, and the two words are separate. Fair is one thing and free is another thing. But it's important that Guyanese be able always to have the freedom and the right to choose our government in a fair and free elections. And May 11th, I once again would represent what I consider to be that opportunity, that right, that exercise of right by Guyanese. What is more important to me, though, is that every single Guyanese respect the law, that every single Guyanese obey the law, operate within the confines of the law, and we do not have repetitions of what happened in 1992, in 1997, in 2001, where we had people storming down the streets and troubling people and burning people buildings down and so on. I don't want ever to see Guyana go back there. I want to see us to be mature. I want voters to vote for the party of their choice, and I want the party leaders to be responsible for their supporters. The party leaders must provide leadership, and because I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because economic development, job creation is one of the most important challenges facing our country. How do we create jobs for our young people, proper paying jobs, so they could buy homes, they could buy the cars, they could travel, and they don't have to go to Miami and Barbados. They could stay right here and enjoy a good life. Job creation is important. The only way you'll have job creation is not with governments. Government don't create jobs. The government create the enabling environment. The private sector. So we have to foster and enhance investor confidence. Investors are not going to come to a country that is politically unstable, where people see violence happening in the streets, regardless of what reason. And so all political leaders, every leader in Guyana, got to live every day understanding that their obligation to the young people and the young people's future is to create an environment, both from optics and from reality, where investors could feel safe and comfortable, and we could create jobs. So that every leader, every church leader, political leader, private sector leader must work every day to help create and foster and enhance the investor confidence to make Guyana a better place. Mm-hmm. So elections must be no different. So I am saying the people of Guyana must exercise their right to vote. The people of Guyana must respect the results of those elections, and we must move on.
Gerry, as you mentioned, exercise their right to vote. What comes to mind is a right to have peaceful protests and so on. Are you averse to that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
okay.
not. I believe the people constitutional right to protest, people constitutional right to freedom of speech. But what you must not do is violate other people's rights to freedom, to existence. So if you want to protest, you cannot block people's bridges. You can't block bridges that will affect our main. So that people must have the right to protest, but the protest, anybody that protesting, you do not have the right to disturb other peaceful citizens.
Mm-hmm. There's a young man, a young Guyanese, James Anthony Bond, who was on early on tonight. And one of the things that he pushes is that there should be no violence, there should be there should be racial cohesion and cohesiveness, because he believes that nobody should be reactive and trying to kill someone else, because our country cannot afford to lose anybody. What do you think about his message of nonviolence? Just give me a second. I have to open the door for Enrico, but you can answer that. What do you think about his message for nonviolence?
I think young James Bond is a star and a scholar and a gentleman, and I fully support his position. I believe that we must move our rhetoric, and I agree with that, from this point to action, and so that they say that the first law of life is self-preservation. And a lot of people like to talk things, and then when our back up is against the wall, then we start to change our behavior. But I believe that the test of time, like our pilots, we don't judge our pilots when we're flying and the weather is great. We judge our pilots when the weather is bad and the lightning is striking the plane, and we're in turbulence and we're in the dead of the night. That is how we check the caliber of our pilots. Same thing we must do with our political leaders. We must check them when the going get tough.
Talking about that, Gerry, the other morning when I contacted you, the call got interrupted because you had a call to Medevac some young lady, some child that was in problems. How did that work out?
It actually went very well. The weather was very bad. They were calling us. We actually meant to leave at 1 o'clock in the morning, but we had reports of a lot of thunderstorms overhead Linden, overhead, and we were going to Mari actually. So we were getting a lot of, and when we looked at the satellite pictures, it was not very good. And we were actually at Ogle sitting. So when I was talking to you, I was at the airport. We were there since 1 o'clock in the morning, waiting to get a break in the weather. The break actually came at the time when I spoke to you, and then we went off. The child that I spoke to you, and then we went off. The child had some fluid in the head, and so there was a 5-month-old baby, and the head is swollen very, very big. So, but we do these medevacs quite often. We go into the jungle, we get beer bottles, we put fuel inside, drop a cloth in the inside, and we light it and create a flambeau, and we put 10 of them on either side of the runway, and we go into the jungle and save many, many Guyanese lives. Something we do on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a month. My planes and my pilots are out there doing that.
Gerry, your family is involved in aviation a lot. Your wife is an accomplished pilot, and your son recently, I read somewhere, you gave him his final exam or something like that. What was that about?
That's correct. That's correct. You know, in a company like mine, issues of succession planning is very, very important. And with all the work myself and my wife Debbie have done over the last 20 years to build this company, we had to be very careful, because even the banks at Financial Rhymer is always very concerned about succession planning. And so my son Gerry he went to school in Canada. He was in the Canadian Air Force, and he wanted to come back to Guyana so badly that maybe 8 months ago, he actually decided he remigrated to Guyana. Both of my sons, both of them are pilots. One is very much involved in issues of search and rescue, accident investigation, issues of national security, aviation security. The other son is a pilot as well, but he's involved more in hotel management, and he's a chef, so he's involved, but he's very much in charge of the restaurants and the airline catering and so on.
Well,
so both myself and my wife are very pleased with the plan in place to succeed me when I go into Arrow Point and spend the rest of my days riding my mountain bike in the jungle.
Gerry, another matter, it is very difficult to escape the most talked about incident in Guyana today, and all the cyber chatter about the murder, the untimely death of Courtney Chrome. What are your thoughts on that as a Guyanese citizen?
Very, very saddened for the family of that guy. You know, nobody deserves to die like that. And I hope that the police do the work around the clock to find the people behind that murder and that assassination. But I also find it very unacceptable that any political party would use that occasion somehow to associate it with politics or associated with elections, because the police have not yet so determined. But I'm very, very saddened by it, and I hope that the police are able to quickly and urgently find the people behind that murder.
Mm-hmm. If you had the ear of the Minister of Home Affairs and the President this evening, what would you tell them?
Well, I only read the news and I saw their messages to the police force. The President, I believe, was very firm with the police to find the people behind that. And I think the Minister of Home Affairs did the same thing. And I would be having the police commissioner report to me probably almost on an hourly basis on the progress being made in that investigation. It's a very sad thing for the family of the boy that was assassinated. I understand he was a GDF officer, which makes it a lot more personal for me, because he would have been a fellow officer of mine in the Army. And so I could only say to you, I hope that people do not use this for cheap politics, because this is a human life. and there's no evidence, in my view, that links this to politics. The APNU, for example, he's not a member of APNU. He was not campaigning for APNU. He was basically a one-man crusader that doing what he believed in. And I think his family need to be proud of him, but we must not draw conclusions until the police are able to do their work.
Gerry, with what we've been hearing here in the diaspora and reading in the news about these random killings from time to time, the increase in violence in Guyana over the past several years, do you personally fear for your life? Do you think the average Guyanese should be fearful?
You know, I will answer you by telling you this. I was in Toronto a couple months ago and at a tourism conference, and some people got up to ask me, said, Gerry, how do you feel about the violence? And my answer to them is, you know, I'm very, very worried because I was actually going down Jane and Finch in Toronto. And somebody told me, don't go there because you will die. The violence and the crime in Jane and Finch downtown Toronto is horrible. And so they said, Gerry, go every place else except Jane and Finch. They said, no, we're not talking about Toronto, Gerry, we're talking about Guyana. And I said, well, you know, in Guyana it's the same thing. I would not go, but I would not go in some parts of Georgetown. But certainly I will tell you that Lethem is a beautiful place, and so is Mabaruma and Cameron. So we may have places in our city where people could feel unsafe, and I understand that in any city that happens. Now, in terms of our crime, I'm not in any shape or form saying that crime is not something that should concern every one of us. Certainly, I will tell you, I believe that this new police commissioner seems to be determined to professionalize the force, and he is leading a new vendetta, not only in terms of fighting crime, but winning the hearts and minds of people in the community. So he's going out there and talking to people in the community, because the only way you could really fight crime and solve these problems is by having feedback from the public. And I found his strategy in terms of reaching out to communities and befriending communities a very effective one as well. So I don't believe the way to fight crime is just with guns. Certainly we need to reach out to communities and win the confidence. And our police force have actually gone through a very tough time in losing the public confidence by some of the action of isolated policemen who really sometimes smear the good name of the police force.
What are your hopes for Guyana, Gerry, in the next 10 years? Huh?
I didn't hear you.
What are your hopes for Guyana in the next 10 years? How do you see Guyana?
Guyana is taking its rightful place back in the Caribbean. You know, for example, our agricultural sector. There's no reason that Guyana should not be supplying the $6 billion that is being spent in the Caribbean to support the tourism and hotel sector in the Caribbean that is coming from other countries. There's no reason that Guyana can't tap in to the supplying of fresh fruits and vegetables to the tourism market in the Caribbean. That is something we have to work on. We have to get our farmers equipped to understand all of the psychosanitary system that is needed. How do they do the traceability back to the farm? What insecticides and fertilizers they use, and so that they could qualify to supply the Hiltons and the Marriotts and the Sheratons in the Caribbean. So that is a big possibility for Guyana. Notwithstanding the fact that Guyana is as an investment haven. We have an educated population, we have an investment climate that is open to foreign investors, and we welcome foreign investors, and so that there's a lot of Caribbean businessmen who have actually been coming to Guyana to open manufacturing companies and so on. And I expect to see that continue and get more and more rapid in the next coming years.
Gerry, you're in tourism. Why tourism?
Sorry?
Why tourism? Why did you venture into that sector?
It's a no-brainer. Tourism is the biggest employer of personnel in the world. Mm-hmm. Tourism generates $600 billion in the world today. Out of that $600 billion, $20 billion is being spent in eco and adventure tourism. Costa Rica and Belize and places like Brazil is taking the bulk of that. Guyana is an unknown entity. Mm-hmm. But we have an amazing country. We have out of this 83,000 square miles, 80% of this 83,000 square miles is covered by rainforests. And 80% of this 80% is untouched by human hands. And so when you think about ecotourism and you look at our rivers and our mountains and the grand savannas and our wildlife and mountain biking and kayaking and the Mountain Rima, listen, we have sites in Guyana and waterfalls that will make your head spin. And in fact, Kaieteur Falls is such an amazing experience that people who go to Kaieteur Falls is almost a spiritual experience. We have not even started marketing Guyana yet to the world. And that is part of the problem we have. Jamaica is spending $100 million a year to market that bankrupt country called Jamaica. Now, Jamaica is a beautiful country, but they are bankrupt. Now, Guyana is not bankrupt. Guyana is growing at 7% a year. We have maybe 10 cents in the dollar in debt relief, but we are spending $500,000 a year on marketing. Jamaica is spending $100 million on marketing. So we have to really start spending a lot more money on the image of Guyana, because bad news is free news. Everybody picks up the bad news in the newspapers. Good news, you have to pay for it. And we've been doing actually a very, very bad job at telling people the great things about Guyana and the great opportunities here in Guyana.
Gerry, what does a tourist or someone visiting Guyana has to expect from one of your tourist outlets?
Let me give you an example. For example, we have signed contracts with big U.S. tour operating companies from Florida, and we work it now with Insulair. We are about to do it with Dynamic Airways. We are about to sell the package tours with Dynamic Airways like we do with Insel. So we sell the package. People buy the airline ticket. They'll get the airline ticket with the hotel, the flights to Kaieteur Falls, the flights to Arrow Point, the visit to Bacanara, the visit to Iracrama, and so on. So what happens is that, and it's amazing, so that let us talk first of all about our own Guyanese diaspora. When they arrive, a lot of them come back home having read a lot of the bad news, because the Kaieteur news every day, they sell their newspapers on sensationalism. And so you read the Kaieteur news, all you get is everything negative. It's loaded with negativity. And so they come back home expecting that. And I'll tell you this, out of the 4,000 people that my company handles every year, 90% of them, they come in and they will be very, very apprehensive, and they're worried about the country. They don't know what to expect. And when they're leaving, every single one of them will say to me, Gerry, this is fantastic. We had no idea. Why aren't you guys telling the world more about this? And sort of, for example, the Americans who are now coming to Guyana for the first time as tourists, when they come here, all of them thought we were drinking Kool-Aid with Jim Jones all day. A lot of them heard that I used to fly Jim Jones, so I spend the nights at dinner talking to them about that experience when I flew Jim Jones, and I went into Jonestown and walk among the dead and so on. But that is just part of Guyana's experience and history. There's phenomenal other things which we speak about. And so they will arrive at the airport, we pick them up, we bring them, put them in our hotels, because Roraima today has set up over the last 22 years where we are able to bring people into the country. We collect you at the airport, put you in our buses, bring you to our hotel, you eat and drink at our restaurant and bar. We put you in our planes, we fly you to the tourism sites, the Kaieteur Falls and so on. Then we bring you back, take you to our marina, put you in our boats. We take you to Arrow Point, you go kayaking, mountain biking. At night we have a dinner around the bonfire. We take you to the Armenian village. We fly you to Baganara. And when you're leaving Guyana, you're checking with our checking counters and you're sitting in our executive lounge before you leave the country. And so we have been selling those packages, 4 and 7 day packages, and it's been wonderful. People are just saying this is really a new frontier, and all we have to do now is spend more money to market. So we're doing it with Insulair and Dynamic Airways, which we're working very close with now. We are the partners and face of Dynamic Airways in Guyana. We are working hard on improving the service and getting it going, but we are going to be selling tourism packages out of New York exactly the same way. So that we'll sell the airline ticket combined with the hotel and so it will be an all-inclusive package. And we hope to be able to move 100 people a week in and out of Guyana.
Well, Gerry, time is on us, but I want to ask you this before you leave, though. Well, 2 things. One, how does anyone find Roraima group of businesses?
www.roraimaairways.com.
And last,
www.roraimaairways.com.
roraimaair.com, you said?
roraimaairways.com.
Oh, roraimaairways.com. Thank you. And last, any message to the Guyanese voters?
Absolutely. Exercise your right, exercise your freedom to choose the government and the political party of your choice. Be proud of what of your political party. Support them, vote for them, and in the final analysis, let us all respect the results of these elections.
Thank you, Gerry. And as
No
I
problem.
said yesterday, you have to leave the meeting,
Yes.
right? So click. I think there's a button there or a link there somewhere that says leave the meeting.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
All right, good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerry.
Bye bye.
Good night.